So now we are entering the second part of this chapter. All right, so in the previous lecture, we have developed a real intertemporal model with investment. So basically in the model, there are three parties. There's households that choose consumption, leisure, and saving decision. Then there's a firm, which is the amount of labor, the demand, and the amount of investment they're going to carry out to maximize their profit. Remember, there are two periods. And then finally, there's a government. What the government does, so the government is going to collect tax. What the tax is going to use for? The tax is going to use to finance some public spending. Just think about some war the government needs to finance. Or there's a stimulus plan that the government needs to implement. Right. So now we are going to use this model to understand some important macroeconomic questions. Right. Sorry. First, yeah. So first, we are going to look at what was the impact of a temporary increase in government spending. This can happen if there's a war, right? Or if there happens, the recession hits, the government want to stimulate the economy, the macroeconomy, right? And then so they want to increase the G. Usually it's like a temporary, right? So how the G change the equilibrium? Let's start from the demand side, right? So let's just start with some partial equilibrium, meaning for the moment we forget about supply side. Okay, we only look at the demand side. So now regarding to demand side, so the question is, so the G increase in G, how would that affect the total demand? Let's use delta as the change in total demand, right? So then the delta is going to come in from the following source. So number one, so you have G2 minus G1. So remember, so this is G increase from G1 to G2. Okay, so this first, because G is part of GDP. Sorry, yes. So G is part of the GDP. So then so the increase in G is going to immediately enters the aggregate demand or the GDP. This is first part. But now, so the G usually is come with some cost, right? So the cost is that, so the household is going to have lower income because the G is going to finance by tax, right? So the first of all, the household income is going to reduce by G2, is going to reduce by G2 minus G1, okay? But then, so they are not going to cut their spending by one. Instead, so they're going to cut their spending by MPC times C, times this amount, right? But now remember, finally, so there's another impact, right? Because the income of the household is going to increase by delta, okay? And then, so this delta is going to translate into some additional spending to the economy, MPC times. Because remember, so the second term, the third term is different. Second term, it says, so immediately, if nothing else happens, the government spend, increase tax, household income is going to decrease. Household income changes by this amount, and then their spending is going to change by this amount. Now, the third term says, so again, so delta is something we're trying to find out. Okay, it's something we're trying to find out. We don't know. But then, so if the income increases by delta, but certainly delta can be negative in either case. Okay, and then so the consumer spending is going to increase by MPC times delta. Okay. Now, from this simple equation, right? So there's only one unknown, which is delta. The G1, G2, that's already we knew, right? So the G is going to increase. That's where we start. MPC is already new, right? So this kind of a parameter. Okay. Now you can solve this very simply, right? So basically you move these to the left-hand side, right? And then, so without much effort, we can see, so delta is going to equal to G2 minus G1. Or in other words, so if we forget about the supply side, we only focus on the demand side. And then the multiplier is going to equal to 1. Now, so delta, this corresponds to the change in aggregate demand. Okay? So in other words, the curve will shift to the right one by one with the increase in government spending. So when I say partial equilibrium or partial expenditure multiplier, is that for the moment we forget about the supply side, because when supply side change, and then so usually it's going to have impact on the interest rate. So that's what's going to happen next, right? For the moment, so let's just focus on the demand side. Okay, if there's nothing change, and particularly in terms of the interest rate, all right, and then so we are going to see the multiplier equal to 1. Right. So first look at here. Right, so this is what I just explained to you. So basically, so this is a total expenditure. This is total expenditure, right? For the moment, we just assume the interest rate is fixed, like partially, right? So now the G is going to increase from G1 to G2, okay? And C is also going to change, but by how much? This is something we are trying to find out. All right, and then so the way we find out is exactly through this equation, right? Okay. So now let's see the equilibrium effect, meaning we are going to consider the supply side, right? So what is going to be the supply side? Maybe we can go to the figure. Let's just look at it here. So supply side, right? So we have talked about the demand side, right? So YD, okay, move to the right hand side, and this horizontal move exactly equal to G, exactly equal to G. Okay? So this is from the demand side. Now, regarding to the supply side, so how the supply side is going to change? Okay, first, the supply side is going to shift to the right. Okay, and why the supply is going to shift to the right? It's because so that's coming from the labor supply. It's going to be labor supply, right? So the labor supply is going to increase because the households, their income is going to decrease, right? So they must increase their labor supply. So this is the first. This is given the interest rate. Okay. Now look at here. So the output increase to the right, so move to the right. Okay. And then so you can see the interest rate is going to increase, right? So the interest rate increase from R1 to R2. Okay. So the interest rate increase, that's going to have further impact on labor supply. Remember, households is going to choose the leisure today versus leisure tomorrow, right? For the future leisure, their price is 1/1 plus R, the relative price, actually times W. Okay, so the interest rate increase, that means future leisure becomes cheaper. And then, so the consumer is going to reduce today's leisure, meaning they are going to increase, look here, they are going to increase labor supply. Hence, this labor supply is going to move to the right-hand side further, right? So this is the impact on the labor supply, right? Now let's look at the impact on consumption, okay? So the consumption, so if interest rate doesn't change and the consumption is not going to change. But unfortunately, so the interest rate is going to rise. Now interest rate rise, so what's going to impact on the consumption? It's very obvious, right? Because again, similar to here, the future consumption, is, the price is going to be 1/1 plus R. Okay? Interest rate increase, future consumption getting cheaper, and then consumer is going to reduce consumption. They are going to decrease investment as well because it becomes more expensive to invest, right? So hence, overall, the government expenditure increase stimulus, right? So they are going to reduce consumption, reduce investment. Yes, they are going to push up the labor supply, right? So in that sense, they're going to stimulate the economy, right? So this is the impact of government spending increase. Again, just think about if there's a war you need to finance, or the government want to stimulate the economy, right? So here, so we did 2 steps. Let's go back, kind of quickly review. Right? So we started with partial expenditure multiplier, or this is like a partial equilibrium, meaning so we don't look at the supply, we don't look at changing interest rate. If that's the case, and then so the partial expenditure multiplier is going to be 1, or in other words, so increase in government spending is going to increase GDP by it's 1 by 1, right? By the way, here by the way, it's here. So there are two impact. There are two impact on the consumption, right? So here one is like crowd out, the other is going to increase. So hence the look at here. So this is a partial effect. This is here. We just start with interest rate is exogenous. It doesn't change. Okay. And then so the impact on C is going to be 0, meaning so nothing is going to change in C. There are two things happen at the same time, right? So the government spending is going to crowd out private spending. Okay, so negative. But on the other hand, so the government spending is going to increase income and then it brings more consumption. But these two is going to cancel with each other exactly. Hence, C is not going to change when interest rate is fixed. Again, so when interest rate is fixed. Okay. Now, when interest rate change, actually in this case, interest rate is going to increase. Okay, so interest rate increase, and then so what happens is, look at here, real interest rate is increase. Okay, real wage is going to fall, and then so the consumption investment is going to decrease. Why? Because future consumption is become cheaper, and then C is going to fall, and investment is also fall because it becomes more expensive to invest. Right. To summarize, government spending will crowd out both private consumption and investment. Yes, it's then so you have higher output. Look at here, you have higher output, right? And a more labor supply. But this comes with the cost of lower consumption and investment, right? So this is the first example. We use this simple model to understand how government spending change affects the equilibrium. Okay? Right. To one more thing, I mean, to summarize or to emphasize, right? Regarding this first case study, the total multiplier is going to be less than 1. This is quite different from what you learn in your principal class when we use rudimentary Keynesian analysis or Keynesian cross, right? So there, the multiplier is greater than 1, but why here is lower than 1? Because we have taken into account two additional things, right? Number one, how the extra output is to be produced, right? So this is going to have impact on interest rate. And number two, the effect of tax, right? So the tax is going to have impact on consumption. Okay? So that's why, so here, so the multiplier is less than 1 instead of greater than 1, right? So actually, so extra government spending comes as cost because it's a crowd of private spending and investment. Okay, and we all have to work harder so that to compensate the loss. But in the rudimentary Keynesian model, the increase in G are costless. Okay, and as a matter of fact, in that simple model, Y and C they increase. Okay, and furthermore, based on this rudimentary Keynesian model we have studied in principle, it may suggest G should be infinitely large. Why? Because the more G you have, the more Y and the more C you have. Okay? It seems like this is like free lunch, but as a matter of fact, it's not, right? Because the G increase is going to crowd out private consumption, private investment, and furthermore, it's going to have impact on interest rate and further put some further downward pressure. Okay? So this is largely overlooked in this simple rudimentary Keynesian model. Right. So now let's look at second example. Okay. Just imagine if there's a natural disaster. Right? So this natural disaster causes a big drop in capital stock. Okay. Just give you example. Okay. So every year, maybe there's a hurricane season in the south. So the hurricane can destroy a lot of house and could damage our factory. Okay, or sometimes you have earthquake or a flood. Okay, so in either case, that's going to create some destruction to our physical capital. Now we want to see how this physical capital destruction is going to change our equilibrium, right? So again, let's just use this diagram to understand, right? So where we start from here, and we start from here. Sorry. So that's where we start, right? That's where we start. We start from here. Now, if there is a decrease in capital, right, either because of the war or because of natural disaster, and then immediately it's going to have impact on the marginal productivity of labor. Why? Because that just means if there's decrease in physical capital, it means each worker, they're going to have fewer amount of capital. Think about cars, think about buildings, think about computers, think about tools, so on and so forth. They can use, and hence their productivity is going to fall automatically or accordingly. So the marginal productivity of labor falls, and the firm is going to reduce the labor demand because the wage, that's just given the wage. Okay, so before wage falls, then the firms want to break even because each worker, they produce less or they bring less revenue, and then so the business want to reduce the labor demand until they reach a point wage equal to the marginal productive labor, right? So that just refers to this part. So the labor demand is going to fall, and why it falls? Because the lower capital is going to reduce the labor productivity, okay, marginal productive labor, right? And then this also means there's a decrease in aggregate supply. Okay, so YS is going to fall as well. Okay, so this is the first step. Okay. Now, what else you're going to see immediately? Okay. The investment is going to increase. The K decrease is going to lead to the investment increase. Why? It's because it's because the capital decrease, and then marginal productivity of capital is going to increase, right? So that's different, right? So this marginal productivity of labor, that's for a given labor, but then so the capital is going to change. Now here, so the investment is going to increase. The reason why investment is going to increase is because the marginal productivity of capital is going to increase. That's because you have fewer capital. And remember, so the marginal productivity of capital is subject to the diminishing return, right? So now you have fewer capital, but in the margin, the physical capital becomes more productive. Okay, so investment increase, that's going to lead to a increase in aggregate demand. Okay, so this is here, aggregate demand, right? But now the question is, now so here we are here, right? So the only things we can say for sure is interest rate is going to rise after this initial fall in physical capital, right? Because aggregate supply is going to decline and aggregate demand is going to increase, right? So for sure, the interest rate is going to increase. Let's write it here. Interest rate is going to increase. Okay. But then, so the interest rate is increased. But what about the output? Because they have a different effect, right? So the destruction in physical capital reduce supply of output, but then the investment is going to increase as the marginal productivity of capital is going to increase, and then the aggregate demand is going to increase. What is going to be the net impact? Empirically or from history, so usually this effect is going to dominate this small increase in investment. Or in other words, usually we are going to observe a decline in output. Now let's see so how a rising interest rate affects the labor supply. Again, remember, households is going to compare leisure today versus leisure in the future. Now interest rate rise means so the future leisure relatively becomes cheaper. And then, so they are going to reduce today's leisure. So that just means the household is going to increase their labor supply, right? So that's what is going to happen. All right. So now finally, let me give you two historic examples to show you what might happen, okay, or might happen differently. In 1993, there's a huge flood in Mississippi. And then so in 2005, there was Hurricane Katrina. So hit US and so creates lots of damage in Florida, and then Louisiana. Right? So in either case, interestingly, so these two effects, I mean, this increase in investment, this increase in investment and this decline in output, so this kind of cancel each other, right? So in these two cases, so the GDP doesn't fall or barely fall, right? But in general, so we cannot precisely determine the direction of output change. But we only know. So what is for sure is that the interest rate is going to rise. Okay, so this is impact of physical capital. To summarize, oh sorry. So this is now we're going to the third examples. Okay, third possibilities or third case study. So what would happen if there's a change in current total factor productivity? Okay. So what can cause a change in current total factor productivity? Okay. So usually, like here, so we talk about increase, right? So usually this can cause by a discovery of new technology. Think about recently we have this ChatGPT, and this ChatGPT can improve our efficiency, or can help us to work more efficient and work better, right? Or like back in 2000, so we have internet, widespread of use of internet. And at the beginning of 20th century, we have electricity, right? So those are examples of increase in current technology, TFP, and increase in technology. Now let's see so how that is going to affect our economy. Again, so let's just use this diagram to understand what's going to happen. Okay, so let's start with Z. That's where we start. Z increase, and immediately you're going to have impact on marginal productive labor. Okay, marginal productive labor. Okay, MPN. Why? Because so the MPN so has a part inside which is Z, right? So essentially, so for each worker, so they are equipped with better technology, and certainly their marginal productivity is going to increase. So now the marginal productive labor increase immediately, that is going to imply the labor demand is going to increase, because firm is going to take advantage of higher labor productivity from the worker, right? So this is captured by this part. Now this labor demand increase immediately means the output supply is going to increase. It's going to capture by this part, right? So now, before we move to the demand side, but immediately what you're going to see is there's a decrease in interest rate. Now, if there's decrease in interest rate, how would that affect the demand side? Okay. In decreasing interest rate is going to lead to C increase. Why? Because consumers comparing current consumption and future consumption. And the future consumption, the related price to today's consumption is 1/1 plus R. Lower R means the future consumption becomes more expensive, and then the consumer is going to substitute current consumption for future consumption. Now, investment is going to increase as well. Why? Because interest rate reduction means it's cheaper to invest, and certainly investment is going to increase. So now investment and consumption increase, and then usually that's going to lead to the aggregate demand is going to increase, right? Now to complete this picture, now let's look at impact on the labor supply, right? So interest rate fall, and then households going to increase, their leisure today. This is similar to consumption, right? But that just immediately means labor supply is going to decrease. Okay, labor supply is going to decrease. That's captured by this part, right? So what is going to be the net impact? And in particular, in terms of labor supply, right? You have an increase in labor demand, but then you have a decrease in labor supply, right? So it sounds like it's difficult to say, but one thing we know for sure is the wage is going to rise for sure. Okay, it might be the case. So this left move is too strong, and then it's going to offset the change in labor supply. But in general, so the rightward shift usually dominate, meaning the total labor supply is going to increase as the outcome of increase in labor productivity, right? So now we can take everything together to understand what the implication on business cycle, right? Just imagine, let me summarize here. So just imagine if there's an increase in Z, and based on what we just discussed so far here, they just imply the following. So C is going to increase, I is going to increase, right? So A is going to increase, right? And Y is going to increase. Okay, so the only thing that falls is going to be the interest rate is going to fall. Everything else, this here is going to increase. On the other hand, so you can imagine if there's a Z decline, and then you're going to see opposite happen, meaning C is going to decline, investment is going to decline, labor supply is going to decline, output is going to fall, and the interest rate is going to rise, right? And to summarize, so the CIN, oh, by the way, so I forgot one thing, which is wage. Here, wage is going to increase as well. Okay, let me write it here. Wage is going to increase as well, right? To summarize, so this wage, consumption, investment, labor, and output, so those are pro-cyclical, meaning, so when we are in the expansion, oh, by the way, so Z usually is considered as a cause of business cycle expansion, okay? So that just means those things are pro-cyclical. When the economy is doing well, and then the wage, consumption, investment, labor supply, output, they all will increase. This is pro-cyclical, right? But on the other hand, so if the economy is in a contraction, and then so those things is going to fall, right? So this is called pro-cyclical. And furthermore, so these things just tells us the TFP can be the main cause of our economic fluctuation. So that's actually this is a foundation for the real business cycle model, as we're going to study later, right? Now we look at the another possibility. So what would happen if there is an increase in future, not today's TVP? Okay, so we was expecting the future economy is going to have major discovery in technology, right? So we are going to have higher expectation. Okay, let's use the diagram to see so what's going to happen, right? Our starting point is there's a increase in Z prime. Z prime means here this is like future, right? So there's an increase in Z prime. Okay? All right. So this Z prime, okay, usually is going to lead to some increase in investment. What this means? Just think about in the financial market, right? So we have this like what we call the animal spirit in the financial market, meaning so people will just respond to expectation, response to their sentiment regarding to the future direction of our economy. If they believe the future of our economy is very optimistic or is very bright, and then so they want to invest, right? So they can benefit from future higher return. So that's why the future Z increase, or they believe the future Z is going to rise, and then they are going to invest more, right? So this increase in I is going to lead to an increase in aggregate demand. Okay? So leads to increase in aggregate demand. But now this aggregate demand increase, and naturally that's going to lead to an increase in interest rate. Okay, everyone wants to invest. Interest rate increase. Now, how would that affect the other aspect of our economy? The interest rate rise, and usually that's going to lead to the current consumption to fall. Why? Again, it's because households are going to trade off between current and future consumption, and the future consumption price is 1 over 1 plus R. R increase, future consumption cheaper, and then they want to substitute the future for today. They're going to decrease current consumption. But this also have a dampening effect on investment because interest rate is going to rise this after this first round, right? So the investment is going to cool down a little bit, right? Not only that, the interest rate is also have impact on labor supply, right? So the labor supply is going to increase. It's going to increase. Why? Because the leisure becomes more expensive for today. right? And then so people is going to reduce their leisure, and then they are going to work more because interest rate is rising. Okay, so those are the second stage, okay? Right? But finally, I want to also bring to your attention. So the income increase here. So there's an increase in income, right? Because the demand is going to increase, and then the GDP is going to increase. The income increase also is going to have impact on consumption because now households are going to have income effect. It's going to income effect, right? So in that sense, the net impact on consumption is a little bit unclear, but I would say empirically, or if you look at data, usually leads to higher consumption increase. Or in other words, this effect is going to be dominated by the increase in Y, but where this is coming from? It's coming from increase in Y. Why there's increase in Y? Look at here. Look at here, right? And then so investment, again, so investment usually probably is going to dominate by this effect. Investment is going to increase, and the labor supply is going to increase. Or to summarize, if there's expectation, the future technology becomes more advanced. And then so what we are going to see is C is going to increase, I is going to increase, and the labor supply is going to increase. Yeah, so we are in the turbo mode. Okay, so the economy is turbocharged, and then so we are going to move to next stage, like a more promising next stage, right? So actually here, so we can see so how the economy is going to respond, right? What do we have here? So from 1950 to 2009 or 2010, right? So here, this is a stock price index, and this is investment, right? So clearly you can see the investment is kind of lead the stock price, right? Look at here. So investment goes up, and then so the stock price pick up after that. Why? Just look at what we just discussed earlier. So investment is going to respond. The investment is going to respond to future technology change, right? And the stock price is going to reflect the value of those things. Okay, so that's why usually it's just a leading indicator. Right, so now we are going to close this discussion by looking at the last case study. So if there's increase in credit market uncertainty, so what is credit market uncertainty? So essentially just says if households so households a little bit worry about the financial market, right? So why there's some concern regarding the financial market. Just think about what happened recently. The Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, right? So people would worry about, so this collapse in SVB is going to have a contagion effect. It's going to affect other financial institutes, okay? Meaning there was worry about there's a collapse in the financial market, and then so you're going to have a hard time to borrow, right? So if that's the case, how would that affect the equilibrium, right? So usually if there's increasing credit market risk, and households becomes more difficult to borrow, right? So they cannot borrow, right? If they cannot borrow, or they have a limited ability to borrow, right? So essentially, so there's less money, or there's less resource available in the credit market. And then the aggregate demand is going to decrease. Why? Because C is going to fall, because households may not be able to freely finance their spending. C is going to fall, and then YD is going to fall. YD is fall. What that means is that interest rate is going to fall. Now, interest rate fall, that's going to lead to a labor supply is going to fall. Why? So the leisure becomes relatively, right? So the future leisure becomes more expensive, right? Remember, so the household is going to trade off between the L and L prime. So the future leisure, the related price is 1/1 plus R times W, right? So R decrease, and this is the since increase. So future leisure is going to decline, right? So today's leisure is going to increase, but today's leisure increase that implies today's labor supply is going to fall, right? So you can see, so the wage is going to increase, labor supply is going to decrease. So at the end, so it's going to have a negative impact. It's going to negatively impact on the aggregate supply. To summarize, so this credit market risk increase is going to lead both aggregate demand and aggregate supply to fall, meaning so leads to the GDP is going to fall. So this is pretty much what happens in 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. Right? And then here, so this kind of reflects what happens. Spread, this is essentially reflects the risk in financial market. Okay? What is the spread? Spread is a difference between the borrowing rate, like regular borrowing rate, versus risk-free bond rate. So higher means there are more risk, right? So people are not willing to lend to you. Like the spread rise, look at here, the spread rise, that corresponds to what we discussed in the previous slide, meaning the risk is increase. And the risk increase based on what we discussed earlier. So it means C is going to fall, YD is going to fall, right? So that's what we just discussed. R is going to fall, right? And the R is going to fall, and then furthermore, so A and S is going to fall, and the YS is going to fall. And finally, so Y is going to fall. I mean, it's the equilibrium GDP is going to fall. Right now, let's look at the real GDP. So that's exactly what happened, right? When the spread increase, the real GDP is going to fall. And why the fall? That just follow the logic we just discussed.